A project that I've been working on recently is elephant-friendly tea. It's an initiative that's in partnership between University of Montana and the Wildlife Friendly Enterprise Network. And so I'm going to just talk a bit about this program. First screen that you're seeing, these are two Asian elephants, young guys. They're just visiting inside of a tea garden in India. So this is in Assam, India, which is in the far northeast. If you look at a map of India, you'll see that there's a section of India that kind of branches off, and there's just an 18-mile land area, kind of a constricted area that you pass through to get over to northeast India. And Assam, India reaches all the way to the Myanmar border. So it's a huge land area that passes through. First, you pass through West Bengal, and it's North Bengal is where a lot of tea is grown. And then Assam is a primary tea growing area of the world. And so most of what you'll see as far as agriculture is related to tea production. And so elephants, this is one of their last remaining strongholds on the planet. They're globally endangered species, and they have two areas where their numbers are the largest on Earth right now. And one is this northeast India area, and the other is in southern India. China has gotten down to about just over 200 elephants. Vietnam has about 75, Cambodia just over 400, and so on. So the numbers are really dwindling, and Asian elephants as a species are quite different than African elephants. And we'll talk about that. But one of the things is this species is so endangered that its decline is much more rapid overall than African elephants. Yet you hear so much about African elephants by comparison. So we'll talk about the reasons for that a bit too. All right, is my volume okay, everybody?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, good. Now I think I have to click there to go there. Okay, somehow, all right, I have to get used to this. So I need to move this little bar so that I can see my whole slide. Maybe okay, I'm not sure how to do that. Anyway, okay, so we are going to talk about an innovative approach to saving a globally endangered species. When all else fails, you have to think outside of the box, and we really try to do that. We've been working on Asian elephants for a number of years. It started for me when I moved to Bhutan, the Kingdom of Bhutan, just north of Assam, and just touching the India border. That living in that country with my husband, who's a wildlife biologist, I was asked to work on an educational program on elephants. And I didn't know a lot about elephants at the time. That was about 10 years ago, in 2010. And I had to learn a lot to even get started to write plans. But one of the things that I do is I develop educational materials, particularly for K-12 teachers. And this specific experience for me was very enlightening, because I realized that it's not one size fits all with education. You really can't just simply write lesson plans and expect teachers to pick up and use these materials. What I found is we had to get innovative and to learn. So I'm going to share a little bit of what I learned and what it led to today. So according to the IUCN, which is the world global organization that basically determines a list of species called the Red List that's endangered threat, it determines their status. And Asian elephants are about 40,000 right now in the world, probably more like 35,000. The numbers aren't always that accurate. They're a little bit hard to count. They're often in jungles, in remote regions, and so estimates are what we use. And sometimes those estimates aren't always based on the best research methods. Okay. African elephants, however, are listed as vulnerable, so it's not as high of a rating as endangered. They are vulnerable. In some places, they are locally endangered, but globally they're vulnerable, which they have 415,000 or so when this when I pulled this from the IUCN list. So their numbers are declining overall. In some places they're increasing, but they also are at risk. We know this story because of ivory poaching. With Asian elephants, only the males have ivory tusks, and so the females don't. And then now in some areas of the world, Asian elephant males have evolved to be tuskless or just have little nubs. And so in a way, what's happening there is perhaps they've selected for the largest tuskers, and they've been basically pulled out of the population. And those that remain, especially in areas that are not in protected forests, these elephants have been basically, taken out for various reasons, and not just for ivory poaching, but also to go into captivity. So some of those big males with huge tusks might have been taken as captive elephants way back, even centuries ago. India, in particular, has a long history of having captive elephants. Okay, and that continues to this day, by the way. So here's a global map of the IUCN that shows the estimated historical range of elephants. So African elephants you can see on the left, and then Asian elephants on the right. Now this orange area was really widespread, so think about these elephants were all the way over to Turkey, and what is today Turkey, and all the way east, to the eastern edge of China. So here we have this dwindling now. Look at the red areas. That's where Asian elephants are that's their probable current range. Now, and sometimes it's hard to know just exactly where they are at any given time. They do range widely, and sometimes they may not come back to an area for several years. So if they disappear and don't reappear after 3 to 5 years, they're probably not coming back after that time. But they historically are known to sometimes just go away for a while and after a couple years make it back. Okay. And I should show you on this map. So right here, can you see my little cursor moving around? Is that showing? Okay. So in this area that I'm going to circle just here, this is where the majority of the world's tea is grown. And you can see the overlap with these little red areas is high. This is Northeast India that I talked about earlier over here, okay? And this red zone where Asian elephants are today is directly overlapping with tea agriculture lands. And so really elephants are truly living amongst the tea growers. Okay, and we'll talk about why this is such an important aspect of conservation that we've got to work with is tea producers to make sure conservation is going to be happening. Okay, so back in 2010, we started thinking about educating folks about elephants in a way that would reduce human-elephant conflict. But as I entered into the, elephants move back and forth between the border of the country of Bhutan and Northeast India. And what I found when I visited the India side of the border is that folks there have a lot more conflict. There are a lot more people. The landscape is much more human dominated than in Bhutan, in Bhutan, they protect a high percentage of their forest lands, and elephants only move it slightly into the country in the lowlands and in a low population area relative to the India side where people are in much of these areas. There are some protected areas as well, dotted throughout this area. This was a group of folks that became our leadership group under a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service grant. We called it Elephants on the Line, this project. And we recruited 120 volunteers across Assam, primary tea growing areas where the human-elephant conflict rate at the time was so high that one year we had 23 people killed by elephants in 1 year's time, in just an area as big as the county I live in, Montana. And so this high rate of conflict, elephants were also getting killed. So sometimes the numbers would be higher for elephants getting killed and sometimes higher for people. And it wasn't always direct conflict that killed the elephants. Sometimes it was something where you don't even know what happened, but an elephant is found dead. With people, though, elephants can get quite dangerous and aggressive, especially when they've been harassed and encountered humans so much. Or if a male elephant goes into the state of must, which is a natural state where they get their testosterone levels increase. It drives breeding behavior and also competition between males, because typically there's one dominant male in an area that would get to mate the herd, and it also follows the herd around. Other males try to challenge that male, and there's a lot of fighting and natural aggression that has to do with that natural process. But if you put people into an area where these natural behaviors are happening, encounters between humans and elephants can mimic and follow those fights between elephants. So an aggressive male elephant might encounter humans who are yelling at them, and they can take a human and throw them, and that can kill a person easily. So this is what happens regularly, and often we find the people killed, a high percentage, are men basically defending their crops, and often it's in the night where elephant has a true advantage that they can see a lot better than we can in the dark. And often human males are fueled by some alcohol, which kind of helps them be braver. And in a way that might benefit them for protecting their crops and being a bit fearless. But on the other hand, a percentage of them will get killed every year by elephants in these areas where they don't have a lot of other strategies beside warding off elephants off of their crops, especially around harvest time. And I was just in India this November and observed this in action happening night after night, and all the things that go on and all the things that go wrong. And it's a quite, it's something that's an accepted part of life in this part of the world. Anyway, these are the leadership teams. So 2 leaders were selected for each kind of village sector that we worked with, and they were brought in for training. And we decided that better than an educational program where we just hand out lesson plans and send materials, it would be to actually engage people in meaningful ways and have them figure out what would work better than what's working now. And so we started this project as a community-based conservation project to find out what was really happening, how many elephants were really dying and from what causes, and what was really going to change with some concerted effort that makes sense to the local people. Now, a few of us, you can tell, aren't the local people, but we were brought in as part of this project to conduct the trainings. But for us, we became part of this community. And to this day, some of these guys in this picture are still with us doing work. And it's amazing to see how committed they are to elephant conservation despite the challenges of living with elephants. So this is what can happen to a house. You see that bicycle? This was just an elephant visited a home. It probably had some rice stored inside the house. Elephants are attracted to alcohol brewing. There's a lot of home brewing going on, a lot of poverty. And I understand the Deaton scholars work on poverty issues. Is that right? From what I read, they're interested in poverty. Okay, so this is very relevant for thinking about how does poverty relate to vulnerability of when you live with wildlife that can be dangerous due to conflicts. Here are some of the poorest people on the planet live in these tea growing regions. There aren't a lot of opportunities for alternative income, and often there are 7 people in one household relying on one tea picker's income of a few dollars a day to survive. So they're growing whatever they can to survive. It's a lot of subsistence living, or they might be pulling wood out of the forest to sell. They'll be doing whatever it takes to survive. And then this happens. And so what we did is we organized the crews to go and collect information, find out exactly what happened. What was the attractant? Why did the elephant come here and knock this house down? And what did the people see and experience? Does it give us any clues into how, of what we might do to make it easier for people to live with elephants and tolerate them? Because more and more we're seeing that people were intentionally going after elephants to harm them because the tolerance was beginning to break. And that's a cultural shift. in Northeast India, where elephants are revered, various religions revere elephants as a god, and they actually, it's the god they pray to every morning is Ganesh, the remover of all obstacles, and that is the elephant god. But in this region, you'll find a bit of a shift happening with the younger generation and some intolerance beginning to happen. And you can imagine if you lost a relative, a loved one to an elephant conflict, that it would be very difficult. Okay, so what we did, this is 1 year's worth of data. What we did is we had this crew go out and collect information. We trained them in how to use a GPS unit. Now we could do this stuff on a smartphone, but that back in 2012, 2013, we gave out GPS units and training, and also cameras with um, telephoto lenses and some professional photography training. And we asked the group to go out and find out what was happening and record it. And we plotted this data with the help of undergraduate students into a collector that was a map-based. And you see the light green areas, those are large tea estates in this zone. And this is about a 400 kilometer squared area that we're talking about here, right along the Bhutan border. So where you see the green forest cover up above the white boundary of Bhutan, you can see how Bhutan forest cover is intact. At one time, this part of Assam was all covered in forests and some grasslands and wetlands as well, but it all looked like the same landscape at one time. And if you were to go back and look back as early as around 1978 and go through a time series of satellite images, you would see that the forest cover declining rapidly over this period. And in between these areas, you'll see a darker green shaded area, and these are protected areas, or so-called protected areas. However, if you visit them, you'll often find people pouring out of them with firewood, or even illegal felling of trees to sell wood for valuable woods like teak and so on. You'll also see poor tea worker families just taking firewood out to cook and survive. In between these light green tea estates, there are a lot of small tea growers. So about half of the tea production is done on small farms of a few acres, whereas the other half or so is large tea estates. So this only shows you large tea estates, but wherever you see a purple dot, that is where an elephant was killed in this 1 year period. And so what we noticed from following these patterns for a few years of collecting data, we noticed that a lot of these purple dots ended up they were very close to boundaries of tea estates, like here, 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 here. There's one right inside of a tea estate. And these tea estates often, produce tea that is sold here in the US in big brands. So you're connected, probably the iced tea that you drink at a restaurant is from Assam, and much of it might be from this very area. But what we saw, the pattern was that there seemed to be something about tea agriculture that was relating here. And as we looked at the data, we kind of saw the cause of the elephant's death when we could get that information. It was a variety of causes, and we can talk about that. But first, we'll get to that. But we're going to talk about global tea consumption. So this is, besides water, this is the second top beverage consumed across the planet, okay, with 273 billion liters a year of tea being enjoyed, and 6 billion cups a day, that is. So that is greater than all alcohol consumed on the planet. And USA tea consumption alone a few years ago was $12.5 billion in sales per year. And tea sales are on the rise. You might notice a shift from soda pops to tea in containers, in refrigerated, in those refrigerated cases, in grocery stores and so on. Tea is really, seen as a healthier choice to soda pop, and folks are onto some of the benefits of tea. Like there are some, you know, positive things for your immune system. There's definitely health benefits that are well known. And so tea is seen as, it's also overall, if you make your own, it's cheaper than a lot of other beverages you could choose. So there are a lot of reasons that people enjoy tea besides the taste. All right. So what we decided as a result of all this data collection and work with communities is that tea growers are in some way contributing to the problems here. And whether it's just because there's so many people working in the tea estates and there's conflict, or it could be some of their practices. So we had to dig deeper and look. But what we saw that were elephant mortalities or deaths and injuries were common, and we wanted to reduce those. If they had anything to do with tea, we wanted to make sure they were reduced. We also want to support the safe passage of wild elephants. And this means safe for the elephants, but also safe for the humans who live in the zones where the elephants need to move between fragments of remaining forests and grasslands. And so reducing human elephant conflict was a goal because we knew that if people didn't benefit from this effort, then it wasn't going to be sustained. Okay, so here's a typical day. If you visit with me to India, you'll find often we can go out in the evening and see that elephants, there's a gathering when elephants are nearby and people are watching them. They might be doing this for sport and fun, a lot of laughter, or sometimes they're afraid. Sometimes they're chasing them away from what they think might happen later, like elephants moving towards crop fields to raid the crops, especially at harvest time in the fall. Okay. What we also saw is that besides conflict, that there are these deep, narrow ditches. Since the British established tea production in India, in this area, back in the mid 1800s, there's been this deep, narrow ditch design between the rows, and this is for water runoff. This area gets the monsoon, and these are heavy, heavy rains. A lot of water moves off the Himalayas down through these tea growing zones, especially in Assam and these areas that are just at the base of the Himalayas where the Indian plain meets the Himalayas. So all this water needs to be moved or it will just waterlog the tea plants. And so elephants have to cross these ditches. So what we found over time, looking at the data, that there were quite a few deaths of particularly baby elephants. So baby elephants are often born in these areas, and the herd that that are often related females, so they're like sisters and aunts to these babies that are born, will stay for a few days until the baby's able to move with the herd, and that usually takes about 3 days till they can move. And then they encounter these big ditches. So a newborn elephant crossing a ditch can be very difficult. And so the females will really try to help the young ones. And there's still some young males in the herds, but when they get to a certain age of sexual maturity, they're kicked out of the herd. And they go around as loners or in small groups of teenage boys looking for trouble. So that's kind of how it works until they're old enough to challenge other mature adult males for dominance. Okay. Oh, by the way, this was going back. Hang on. So this is on your left, that's my husband, Scott Mills. He's a wildlife biologist here at University of Montana. He's a professor, and his graduate student, Alex Kumar. And they came with me to India a few years ago to do some training with local forest department and nonprofit groups on elephant monitoring, how to improve the counts using current technology. But they also helped me look at, what would a better ditch design be? What could work better than the current ditch design that's been around since the mid 1800s? How can baby elephants, pass safely, but you still have all this water to move out? So we took a look at that, and we have some ideas for sure, after doing some interviewing with local folks, growers as well. Okay. Well, you can just see, here's this young elephant trying to cross and the other baby elephants watching on. And this is a very weathered, shallow ditch. So the baby made it, but you can just imagine they don't always. And what often happens is it's dark at night A baby elephant's trying to cross with a herd because that's when a lot of the elephants move is at night under the cover to avoid human contact. And if a baby falls in a ditch and is trapped and can't get out, the mother and the other females try to help it with their trunks and move it out. But sometimes when it's real muddy and rainy, the baby just gets buried in mud. And so this is where we've seen a lot of losses of young elephants. Also, some older elephants. Here's one that was it made it out. People helped it with a bulldozer and got it to stand up again. But this one just went upside down in a tea estate in Assam, within that zone you saw on the map. Okay, elephant poisonings. There are many deaths of elephants that they say, unknown cause, unless they test the body and find some poisoning. And what we found is there was, especially at some years early on when we started our work, there were quite a few poisonings happening. And as this was looked in, we work with wildlife veterinarians, rescue vets, and they found that the chemicals in their bodies were the same as the agricultural chemicals used in tea estates of conventionally grown tea. And urea is an attractant with salts in it. And uh, at one point, about 8 elephants died all in one spot from getting into some urea. So it can really be devastating. But the attractants, if they don't store this stuff properly and apply it, there also were some suspicious poisonings, as if they were intentional. Okay. Water access for elephants is really important, and the more developed the landscape becomes, the more difficult it is for elephants to access. Now, this tea estate allowed a big water tank to stay open so the elephants could drink out of it. The problem is about a year ago, this same tank, which we thought was, great, no problem, an elephant got caught in it, and so they can actually get in and not be able to come back out. So it would be preferable for natural sources of water to be protected and accessible to elephants that need to move between these habitat areas and move through tea gardens. And they still need water because remember, they've often been waiting all day long in the hot sun, waiting and waiting for people to go away for the night so that they could move without conflict. And so they're very, very thirsty and very aggravated, but water access is huge. Here's a typical scene: people trying to chase elephants out of a tea garden. And um, you wonder why, but it may be that there's rice being grown just outside of that tea estate, and they don't want the elephants to come in that direction where that night they might raid their crops. They want them to move on. But you could ask the question of where are they going to move to the next village where they get into conflict. So without an overall plan for elephants to keep moving, and they need to move to get enough to eat and drink, it is very difficult. It's in this patchwork landscape, but somehow they're still coexisting in pretty big numbers, like 5,000 elephants or so in northeast India right now are still managing in a human dominated landscape. All right, this is just, a peaceful situation. So these are female elephants. When you see them in a herd, they're typically females or some younger males with them. And so this boy looks pretty relaxed watching them because the females typically aren't the more aggressive ones. And this boy's too close and things could happen, but typically it's the males you have to watch out for. Okay. Here in West Bengal, so the state, just as Northeast India, you enter Northeast India from the main part of India, is the state of West Bengal. And this area is a tea growing zone in the north part, called the Duars region. And this made it into the media and went around the world. It was just like people were like, how could people do this to elephants? But the reality of people who are just surviving and they're looking for ways to protect their crops during the harvest season, this is happening all the time. But what is the solution? So that's the challenge. When people could lose everything in one night to a herd of elephants, their entire year's work could be gone and they'd have nothing to eat. Okay. Electrocutions are another problem, and actually this is the number one cause in India now of deaths of elephants is electrocution. Here, a young elephant was found in a rice paddy field by our team here. And it turned out in this case, somebody had tapped an electrical line illegally and run a live wire, and an elephant touched it and died. And you can see the burn mark there on its trunk. That's a telltale sign that this one died of electrocution. You see, elephants are as sensitive as we are. If you don't electrify a fence safely like you would for livestock, like a horse fence, like we do, and you instead use live wire and it's not grounded, and it's the charge could easily kill an elephant, even a full mature elephant. This happens all the time, but it's also dangerous for people. But desperate farmers are doing desperate things. Okay, so I've got to move this. Can't quite see my little title there. Sorry. um, What does that say? I'm sorry, I'm not seeing. Landscape connectivity. Okay, so let's talk about the overall landscape connectivity. So here are these wide-ranging elephants that eat hundreds and hundreds of pounds of food per day. They need so much food. They've got to keep moving or else they'll eat up their own environment. And they've got to make it to places where they can forage without too much stress. And so this is a matter of landscape connectivity. And so they are kind of stuck, most of them are kind of stuck moving through agricultural lands. And agricultural development is expanding, not decreasing in these zones. So this is sort of repeating the same story in southern India where the other large population is still remains. Now, if you look to China and see what happened already there, the same story was playing out long ago where there was tea growing, there was elephants in Yunnan province, and then came the palm oil boom and and rubber boom as well. So back to back, and those agriculture became a monoculture with not much for elephants to find in between. And so now that last remaining population that's dwindled to almost down to 200 elephants in all of China is basically divided into 8 tiny fragmented populations of elephants that can't interact with each other and breed anymore because they can't make it across these huge landscapes of monoculture. There's nothing for them to eat, and so they can't cross anymore. So they're functionally heading towards extinction very rapidly, and they'll likely be gone soon. Whereas in India, there's still biodiversity, there are other plants growing between the rows of trees. There are opportunities to improve habitat that does still exist and to protect what's left so that elephants can sustain. But people really are the key to this if we don't want to have a repeat of what happened in China. So here we went with a crew of with drones, and we looked at what is the difference between some tea farms and others. Some that elephants might be able to cross the landscape more calmly, not experience so much stress and conflict. And we found that some tea growers were doing really well with keeping a fair bit of forest cover. We found that organic farms typically have a lot of native vegetation and weeds, all kinds of things. There's a lot of biodiversity, and elephants can kind of forage and pick along the way and move through. Elephants will tend to spend more time where there's less stress, so they might get visited disproportionately more often than the large tea estates that are more of a monoculture. But the Tea Board of India, even currently still recommends just a few species of trees that they would interplant. They recommend all kinds of chemicals, and they really go for more of a high production, make more money. This is like much agriculture. The emphasis is overall with the tea industry similarly is out to it's about making money and achieving these larger goals for volume of tea produced. The problem is it's not really sustainable for the environment, and it's not really good for the health of the workers, all these chemicals. And we're losing biodiversity and losing other opportunities potentially like tourism from something like, elephants are one amazing endangered species in the area. But if you were to look deeply, you'd see there's also tigers in this landscape. There are leopards, hornbills, many species under threat are here and can actually be viewed. Um, or at least knowing they're there makes this a really interesting place for tourism. Okay, so one of the things that we looked at is, can we work with local communities in a way to encourage that they protect biodiversity within the tea farm boundaries? Is this something, will they want elephants to visit the farm, or will they really, just want them out so that there's less conflict and less fear? And we found that some tea growers were quite willing to come on board and do things differently, and many are already doing it, like a lot of the organic farmers. But what they really wanted was opportunity, and they thought it would be a really good idea to do a certification program that would drive change. Because certification is big in the tea industry, as many industries, where you basically get a positive bump in the marketplace if you can stand out and have a special niche. And so we created this elephant friendly certification program in partnership with the Wildlife Friendly Enterprise Network. And here, as a side project, we applied funding to support women in poverty who could grow native trees. And then locally, these trees could be planted, but these women would be paid to grow these trees from seed to at least the seedling or sapling stage, and then those would be planted by communities to improve habitat where a lot of habitat had been degraded by removal of too much firewood and um, too much rapid development where people didn't think to replant the native vegetation once something had disturbed the landscape. Okay, so these children locally got involved, and this was one of our first, during a pilot phase of this program, a certified elephant friendly farmer named Tenzing Badosa. He helped me get this project going. But what we did is I had kids in the US contributing their quarters and pennies and all to this tree planting project. And these children in India have their own little forest now of trees. But they were learning, part of the learning process was to learn about what elephants are actually doing and why they're visiting these areas and why there's so much conflict, and why it points back to the fact that we need to make sure they have habitat and areas to go to away from people. Okay, so a word about our partner organization, the Wildlife Friendly Enterprise Network. So University of Montana was looking for a way to do this program, but we ourselves as a university are not a certification organization. We needed to find someone who knew what they were doing in that area, and that we could supply the scientific work and advise. So when we found this partner, the Wildlife Friendly Enterprise Network, they had long been, for 10 years now, they've been doing certifications, usually on a very small scale, around the world with small producers who are doing good things for conservation. So they have a gorilla-friendly tourism program, they have wildlife-friendly general certification program that can benefit a number of species, and so on. And so we suggested that this certification program go through this partner, that they would manage the program, and they agreed to this. Okay, so here are some of the kinds of products and services that are certified. And here is elephant friendly tea over here. This brand, Elephant Origins, I actually went off in another direction and started a commercial venture called Elephant Origins, a philanthropic company that would support these farmers that go elephant friendly. So just to get it started in the market, test it out, see what happens. It's turned out that now this product's in San Diego Zoo stores and a number of places it started to take. And even now some larger brands are starting to come on board and either sourcing directly from certified elephant friendly tea plantations, or they're buying bulk tea and putting it under their own label. Through distributors, like Elephant Origins is primarily a distributor now. And then these other products like ibis rice over here on the left, this is certified wildlife friendly. It's a project between the Wildlife Conservation Society and farmers in Cambodia to basically protect habitat for the ibis bird, which was highly endangered. And they've made great strides on this. And a lot of this rice, I understand, is sold in Europe, like in Germany, in natural grocers. I've also been seeing it advertised in Cambodia and Vietnam in local restaurants and so on. But this is a really this project inspired me quite a bit. It came before elephant friendly tea, and I saw the potential for this, where it would feed money back into the conservation effort, and that basically farmers would know that part of the deal is they could not cut down more forests to grow more rice. They would get a price premium for their rice and do well. And we are finding the same with the beginnings of this elephant friendly tea program, which really just went to full launch in November. We had a couple years of piloting it and testing the market. Okay, sorry, every time I touch that's sensitive. Okay, moving on. So aspirationals, there is change happening, and the consumers are getting onto the fact that there's a good portion of folks that are considered aspirationals, and they're not all in the US, okay? India has a large number of aspirational consumers. These are folks who really, and maybe you're one of them, they want to get high quality products for a reasonable price, and they want to know where the product was sourced from, and they want to know that their purchase makes a difference in some way. And these folks are having this growing consumer movement is really having an impact on the goods that are put out there. And elephant friendly tea kind of fits within this nicely because it's an area of growth opportunity for something that's new that's coming onto the market. Okay, so this is where aspirational people are a force for change. They take their materialism and sustainable values and cultural influence, and all tied up together, this can really be a powerful consumer force. You can imagine that the opportunities are endless if you get this formula right and you head in this direction. So there is opportunity beyond elephant friendly tea. There's now a jaguar friendly coffee, and it's doing really well from what I understand. Okay, so what we find, that there are various aspects to running a project like this that take a lot of time, effort, and money. And money is what's short at the beginning, but we are finding an economic model by charging a fee that is primarily going to the Wildlife Friendly Enterprise Network for sustaining the certification program, but we're also putting some money into the cost of making this all happening. There's some marketing and storytelling and visiting, and audits have to happen of the farms. But what we find is that tea growers need to be educated, so do communities, that there are options and what it would take to become certified elephant friendly. What are the standards? What are the best practices? How would they attain those? And one of the things I did for years is go visit tea growers, large and small tea growers, particularly in northeast India. And I found out, like here on the right, the picture, this gentleman, he was manager of multiple tea plantations for a very large tea company in India. And he said to me, this was probably around 2014, he indicated that tea growers would be very much willing to make change happen. They just need to see that price premium. And he mentioned the model of fair trade, that works because money comes back to the growers to benefit their tea growing communities. And that is the model that he suggested. And so we do look at that and think about what are the benefits that come back, the price premium, the money that comes back on the ground, and to make a difference. Also, certification by the Wildlife Friendly Enterprise Network. We really had to have partners we could trust to pick up and move this forward. And so they follow guidelines that are internationally accepted, for having standards that are science-backed and attainable by growers. We helped advise on that and brought in other experts to do it. We also have to monitor the impact. Like Is this making a difference? Does meeting standards actually benefit elephants, and does it help reduce human elephant conflict? And so we have to have partners to help with that monitoring. And this is an area where we have camera traps set out on one elephant friendly farm to see, do elephants, what are their behaviors? What other species are influenced when a farm is high on biodiversity and protected and things are kept calm? The behaviors of people matter for certification. That's part of that, is having a plan for the way people interact with wildlife and making sure that things stay calm with elephants. Lead to fewer deaths of people and less conflict if you can keep things calm and let elephants just pass quietly instead of chasing them constantly. Community engagement. What is it? What role do the actual tea pickers and their children and the broader community play? They have to buy into this idea. You cannot have it stop at the boundary of the tea estate, because as soon as the herd of elephants leaves the estate, they're into a different zone. And often this is tea workers and their families. So they need to understand that, for example, that leaving trash about could lead to plastics being ingested by elephants. And that has created more and more elephant deaths over time in recent years. Also, the way they guard their crops. Can it be done in a consistent way that elephants will learn that this is human area and over there is where elephants can go, but can it be done in a way without it leading to elephants being chased, running towards another settlement that then, leads to terrible encounters with other people? So a lot of work is done, and a lot of scientific research depends on local people to provide information ongoing. And this is one of the projects that I'm working on today. Is we're submitting a grant to NASA to try to use satellite imagery to help us monitor what's happening on the ground with vegetation, but also can we involve citizen scientists, so people on the ground in communities, in checking and making sure, are those weeds? Can you help us identify that plant? Is this a new invasion of weeds that's going to block out the regrowth of native plants? And so some of this is what we aim to do at our next steps. But that scientific research has to continue, and every year it's something different. Like right now, electrocutions are the #1 cause of elephant deaths. Years ago it was poisonings. What will be next? We don't know. So we have to stay on top of it and collect current data and have partners on the ground. Also, sales of certified products. Agricultural producers will not sustain their certification. It costs them a fee. It also costs them time, effort, and money on the ground. What gives them the true incentive? So we have to be able to make sure sales are happening. And so that is big in itself, and that's why we do a lot. We wear new hats we've never worn before as educators and researchers, is we are now entering into the world of commercial marketing. And that's new to us, but having found that partnering is the best way to go, we're finding that some large brands are beginning to take interest in this program, and we believe they will be influencers. So when large brands begin to adopt elephant-friendly certified products and have a label on their products saying it's certified elephant-friendly, our hope is that will take it to the next level. We also need to educate youth. Often it was young boys we found chasing and harassing and throwing rocks at elephants, causing a lot of stress. They thought it was a fun sport. So one of the things is, can we educate them that when they do this, it could lead to someone getting harmed later or that night, or elephants might just out of aggravation knock houses down. They do that. So we put in their own local languages, educational materials out on posters. We also have local teams of folks that have presented in schools and talk about and do community meetings to talk about how to improve things for elephants and for the people who live with them. Okay, and here's a little bit about Elephant Origins as that first brand that got started. And there's still a website. You can order tea, elephantorigins.com, if you want, order a bag of tea. But also what we found is, it's telling the story. So any brand that's carrying this logo you see on the package. So when this logo goes on another brand, I can't announce it yet, but a big brand in the US is about to go elephant friendly. When that happens and people go to the grocery store and see that logo, we hope that will pique their curiosity and that you all will, of course, look at this and say, oh, I recognize this and understand more about what's behind it. This is Tenzing Badoza and his family. He was the first farmer to undergo elephant friendly certification. He's a small farmer, only owning about 20 hectares of land. We are now finding we have 5 more tea estates. Thousands of acres have already now completed their elephant friendly certification. And as this scales up more and more, my hope is the small farmers will still benefit, but also large corporate farming can begin to shift towards meeting all these best practices by meeting the standards of certification. Okay, so elephants don't eat tea plants, by the way, but they do eat what's in between it. And here is an elephant just relaxing, enjoying a snack in a tea garden. Here's a little bit of it. You can follow more about this effort as we carry on. But like I said, we just launched the final standards in November, our partners at the Wildlife Friendly Enterprise Network, and the first 5 audits of tea estates happened since that time. So everything's happening fast, and 2 large brands in the US actually are adopting, and some European brands coming on. So I think we're going to see a lot change in the next year for the program. But I always welcome questions and even emails, or follow our story on Instagram or Facebook at Elephant Friendly Tea, or our website at www.elephantfriendlytea.com. How about questions?
So there are some questions in the chat box.
Okay. Can you read them to me, since I can't move this? What I have is this bar and I don't know how to, maybe if I just click it, hide it. Okay. So I don't see the chat box.
It's down like at the bottom of your screen, like where the share screen button was.
Okay. I'm not sure.
I think what I did to view it was I stopped sharing my screen last week. If you can do that.
Yeah, that would help, huh?
Okay, and then down at the bottom next to the share screen button, there's one that says chat.
Ah, okay. Click on that.
Yeah, so the first question was from Yanu.
Okay, super. So, hi Lisa, I'm Yanu from Indonesia. Thank you so much for presenting on important issues. We have a similar problem here in Indonesia, especially in Sumatra region, with elephant conservation and forest deforestation in general, mostly due to the expansion of palm oil plantations. Is there any idea or ways for making the tea and palm oil plantations sustainable for both poor people and for wildlife? Any best practices that we could learn and follow? Thank you. Okay, so my answer, it's not my simple beginning answer, would be that you would need to engage with palm oil growers, and I believe there are some sustainable palm oil certifications out there already, but they're not specific to elephants. But many of the things may overlap. I would say that you find out what are the problems presented by palm oil specifically for elephants. If it's that you've basically eliminated a large percentage of their habitat, you have to start with mapping like what remains and what are the known elephant movements. You have to have the information to begin with, and then you need to find out what are the causes of death or conflict. So like we did, and it takes a while, and I'm sure groups are already working on in these landscapes. Probably a lot of NGOs in the forest department have some responsibility for this. But I would reach out to them and find out what are they doing, and are the elephants moving through palm oil plantations, or have they fenced it all off? Like what we found with tea is more and more fences were being put up everywhere, and more they were becoming like razor wire fences or things that elephants really could get hurt by or could not pass at all, or even some walls were going up and creating, like, diverting the elephant movements over into villages and creating more conflicts. So you have to get buy-in. And the tough part with palm oil is these are often large corporate brands that may not have an interest in conservation unless they can see benefit financially. And that's like the tea industry. We had to find that angle, but we had to interview them and find out what changes would they be able to implement based on the data that we collected. What would they be willing to address in a positive way to benefit elephants and the people that live with elephants? And you have to just start, and it's a lot of work, and it takes years that you don't have. Elephants in that Sumatra region don't have a lot of years at the current rate of decline of their loss of habitat rate. So I think, you have to really find out who's already doing work, and could some kind of coalition be formed for folks to look at this. But I would be happy to help have them look at the elephant friendly model and what we're doing. And our standards are actually posted online on an elephant friendly page on the Wildlife Friendly Enterprise Network's website. And so it's Wildlife Friendly Enterprise Network. I think it's wildlifefriendly.org, but you can look it up and look at the standards and see if some of those might apply to other types of agriculture. We started with tea, but we see relevance, and we would like to see this scale up and include other commodities, and really have this charge up efforts, because livelihood is right up there with conservation. If you're going to have it be successful, you need both. Okay, next question. So the interface, this is from Deaton B. Okay, I'm not sure who that is, but it says, how fascinating. The interface between wildlife, the environment, and human poverty is intriguing. Thank you very much for this presentation. You're welcome. Could you describe how the problem of the water ditch drainage was solved to enable the elephants to cross? And Brady, okay. So it's not solved everywhere, but for those tea growers that were willing to make changes, for example, one tea plantation, this was in North Bengal, the state of West Bengal, that was recently certified. During an audit, most of their tea ditches were weathered enough that it looked like safe passage of elephants would be fine. However, there was one still deep and narrow ditch reasonably, and they also had one water tank that didn't have a lid on it. It was just exposed. They made those two changes. They basically filled the bottom of the long water drainage ditch with rock, and that they therefore mitigated that problem. And the other one with the water tank, it was an old abandoned water tank, so what they did is filled it with rock and dirt and just filled it all the way to the top because they weren't using it anymore anyway. And that's how they solved it, and they were able to achieve certification and did a great job. Now, granted, some tea estates would have a much harder time making change because if you're talking thousands of acres and deep narrow ditches that have been in place since the mid 1800s, they're going to have to decide, is it worth them to them? So those might be later. Right now we're in the early stage, but when they look at these folks who are now going to be selling to a large brand in the US their tea at a higher price hopefully than they're normally getting, that could be an influential decision point for these larger growers to say, maybe we need to be doing something different, because right now the tea prices are depressed and it's difficult, and it was even before the coronavirus situation. Tea prices were not thriving, but on the international market they do better. Okay, hope that helps.
So Lisa, we're gonna start wrapping up, but there is another question if you want to like briefly answer the remaining questions.
Okay.
That would be great.
Right. Okay. Is that this one? Is it possible to, or which one? Can you read it out loud?
Yeah, I'll just read them.
Okay.
Let's see. So how have you seen consumers react to the elephant-friendly tea initiative and the elephant label? Is there education about the impact? And that's from Holly.
Okay, Holly, thank you. So good question. Well, what we did is at the university in a market, we put out the products and I found at first it was a little slow, and then we put up a little sign explaining what that label meant and how it was related to our conservation research and efforts. And then suddenly it was started to fly off the shelves. And so I think that education really matters and having something to go with it. We also found that it sells better in some places than others. So if people are just looking for cheap products, there's definitely a higher price at this point. And as we get into larger growers that have lower pricing, that may not be the case. But we've been kind of working with smaller growers whose pricing will tend to have to be higher because they're organic already. We find strong alignment with organic certified products or just organic products from small growers that don't have that certification. We also are finding that we are going to have to up our social media presence and our storytelling. And we've been so busy with just the basics, but very soon we are going to start a social media campaign. And we would love to have people take over our social media sites too and, do something fun to attract attention and bring education out to more people and make our reach much larger than it has been. We are not marketing specialists, so this is really a challenge for us. And we need to bring on folks who can do it in a way that we will reach the kind of tea drinkers out there that would find this interesting. Okay.
Okay, and then the final question was from Ann and Brady again. They said, is it possible to plant intentional food trails of fast-growing foods that elephants would eat through the impacted territories that the elephants would become accustomed to use?
Yeah, well, some of these efforts are happening. We're not involved, but there is one project that is happening not too far from where our primary focus has been. And they have planted some native vegetation, but also some rice for elephants. So good or bad, it could be argued all day long. Do you want to introduce highly nutritious foods that aren't natural for elephants just to have them stay in areas and keep moving along certain pathways? Another project, though, does it quite differently. They created an elephant corridor and moved people entirely out, paid for good schools, hospitals, and garden plots and all outside of an elephant corridor, and basically funded the moving of an entire community away so the elephants could just take over an area completely. There was a critical linking point between some forests. So there are different approaches. What I like are the ones that kind of meet a happy medium where you can provide connectivity, but also try to keep elephants in as natural of a state as possible. And I think one of those is if we could remove the weeds and stop the invasion of noxious weeds into these areas, jungles recover in these zones. These are wet biodiversity hotspots of the earth that overlap with tea growing areas. Forests recover very fast, and elephants will spend more time in the forest if they can access plentiful vegetation that's natural. So I would like to see more efforts in that way. I'd be less apt to want to attract them to move more actively through human habitation zones because of the conflict levels are so serious.
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming and talking to us today. I think we're going to put this online, so it'll be available on YouTube.
Right.
And
Yes,
thanks again.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate everybody. And please follow up if you have any more questions, comments, suggestions, or just want to jump in and help us. All right. Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.